Welcome to another episode of Health Your Way podcast, where we discuss health issues ranging from physical, mental, emotional, as well as current fads. Today, we're going to be talking about art therapy, transferring pain into beauty. And my guest today is Yehudit. She's an author, a creative art therapist, a former chair of Department of Creative Arts therapist at Concordia University in Montreal, Canada. I want to say thank you for having this conversation with me. I've never heard of an actual creative art therapist. So this is really maybe enlightening for me. And I appreciate you taking the time to actually speak to me about this. So welcome. Anything you want to add?
Thank you. No, it's lovely to be here.
I think for a lot of people like myself and everybody else, what is creative art therapy?
Yeah, it's a good question. Creative arts therapies is really using the arts in a therapeutic way. And one of the major concepts in creative arts therapies is the idea of creative projection.
Okay.
So that if you're feeling something strongly inside, is to express that into a creative medium, whether it's music, dance, drama, art. And then, first of all, it's not so overwhelming because it's
Okay.
outside. And it's also something that you and the creative arts therapist can then work with in a safe way. And creative arts therapists are now all over the world working in many different settings.
So then for me, would you say that it really depends on the person in respects to what they use in a creative way? Like it could be music. I'm just trying to could be music, paint, or anything like that.
Yeah, that's a good question. Basically, there's different disciplines in
Okay.
creative therapies. For example, at Concordia, where I was a professor, it's a graduate school, so it's master's level, and there's music therapy, art therapy, and drama therapy. There's not dance therapy yet. We're hoping
Okay.
it will come. But each discipline is different, and each discipline has a different training to it.
So
Um,
then go ahead. Finish your sentence. Sorry.
some of us, definitely the arts can be integrated into a session. For example, I'm trained as a drama therapist and a dance therapist, but I also use a lot of art because in my work with myth and fairy tale, we make masks and we use art. So for me, I really consider myself a creative arts therapist because
Okay.
I use all the arts.
So then for somebody that like maybe a practitioner, I'm not sure it could be used as therapy, like why would they consider using this in their practice as a modality? Because I mean, like I don't when I meet other therapists or when I've interviewed other therapists, creative art is never a concept. I'm sorry, just like why would they even consider doing that?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. First of all, creative arts therapies is its own discipline,
Okay.
and it involves a really rigorous training because it's usually at a master's level, a graduate level, that you're trained in it, except for music therapy, which has BA and MA. So, to be trained as a creative arts therapist, you have to be strong in your art and also be strong in psychology and psychology courses. So for someone else that wants to integrate, who's not trained as a creative arts therapist, who wants to integrate the arts into their practice, they could certainly do that, but they couldn't do creative arts therapies because that's its own discipline. It's a unique
I
training
see. Okay.
that's really a rigorous training in how to use your particular arts in a therapeutic way. And that's not necessarily an obvious thing to do. You really need to be trained on how to do it, how to work with it, and you need to be very comfortable in the arts to be able to do that. So I think if another therapist who's not trained as a creative arts therapist wanted to integrate some art into their work, I think the way to do that would be to primarily, if they're a verbal therapist, keep it on a verbal interaction. But if the client is struggling, which often clients struggle to articulate, when we're feeling something strongly, it's really hard to verbalize it, right? Because we feel overwhelmed with feelings, and often we have no idea where it comes from, and we can't even access those places. And the arts are a tremendous way to be able to access what's hidden and difficult to uncover in ourselves. And I believe that everyone is creative, that it's in our DNA, and that it's as necessary for health as good food and exercise. And particularly now with the pandemic and everything that's going on in our world, it's so important to be able to access our own creativity because it's life-giving. It really promotes resilience and our own inner strength.
I like what you're saying because I've never thought of it that way. Because a lot of people, if you listen to music and you dance, you're kind of, it helps you decompress or release some stress. But for me, I'm wondering, as a society, and art's is not like art's there, but it's not really promoted in schools to a certain extent. That's my opinion, right? You can re-educate me if you want, right? And with that said, I'm thinking, would it be fair to say as a society we should not only think of just going to psychiatrist, but look at different modalities or ways that others can heal? As you mentioned, it's hard to speak, but if you try different things like painting or dancing, it's a different way of expressing yourself that can help you heal. So I guess my question is, should we be also looking at things like that as a society to help people that are suffering to help people that are suffering to aid in their overall well-being? Is that fair enough? Does that make sense?
And I agree with you about the schools. I think it's really sad that the arts are not in schools, right? And also that because children innately play and they're creative. I mean, whenever you look at children playing, they're being creative. They don't think about it, it just happens organically. So that really is within us. And I think that it, it's necessary for people to have alternatives other than just verbal therapy. And I know for me, I also I worked in Montreal hospitals, several Montreal hospitals, as a creative arts therapist, and I was often given clients that didn't respond to anything else, that were difficult to work with, and I found that the arts were really an avenue for them to be able to access what was so difficult for them. Some of them to access trauma, sexual abuse. I worked with severe anorexia, 15-year-olds that were hooked to heart monitors that weighed 65 pounds and really were at risk of dying. And working with the arts and also working with my approach of myth and fairy tale was a way to very slowly and safely have them begin to access what was beneath this. What was really causing this eating disorder and their feelings of self-worthlessness and how through their creativity being able to generate feelings of resilience and health.
I appreciate this conversation because for me, a lot of people take for granted art, right? They take it for granted, like drawing, music, or stuff like that. They don't realize how that could help them heal. So for anybody who's watching or listening itself, like if they're interested in getting into the modality or having the modality and placed on people themselves or others, where would they start? Because I've never heard of it, so I don't even know how to like. I'll let you talk. Go ahead. I'll let you talk.
Well, I think you're not alone, right? A lot of people have not heard of creative arts therapies, even though, as I said, what's exciting is that it is used all over the world in many different languages, many different cultures. And right now it's even used besides hospitals and prisons and community centers. It's used with the military for treating PTSD. And there's an art therapist that's been using masks, making masks with there's suffering from PTSD, and it's been very powerful. And there's been drama therapists that have been working with scenes and reenactments, and there's movement therapists that are working with the body. And so there's so many opportunities out there and places where creative arts therapists are working. I would suggest, if people are interested, is to look up, since we now have the internet, to look up dance, right? I mean, used to be harder. There's advantages and disadvantages with social media, but that's not the conversation for this.
It's a different story.
Looking
Yes.
up art, another story, another podcast. Drama therapy, music therapy, dance therapy. Look up those terms, and then you'll find um, the most prominent ones are the American organizations. But every creative arts therapy discipline has an organization, at
Okay.
least one. Many of them, like music therapies all over the world. There's probably 100 music therapy associations. So that's the place to start because
Okay.
they will tell you more about the discipline. They have a list of, let's say, for example, music therapists or art therapists and where they're located. They also, it's great to go to conferences. Now they're virtual, but to attend conferences, lectures. Um, there's really no end to what's out there in terms of creative arts therapies. But I think that's the first place to start is to look up the organizations.
I like that because I think just the idea that, it exists now makes it easier to look for it and know that there's different modalities within the art therapist. I think, and then as we mentioned earlier, that you're an author. You recently wrote the book, The Story Within Myth and Fairy Tales in Therapy. I guess the question is, why did you write the story? Why do you think there was a need for it?
Mm. Yeah, it's a good question because it was a lot of work. Why write a book? Yeah, I had, as a creative arts therapist, I really created this approach in my clinical work.
Okay.
Always been interested in myth and fairy tale. I was a professional dancer and choreographer at one point in my life, and I used a lot of myth and fairy tale in that. And when I was working in the hospital, I found that combining creative process with the power of myth and fairy tale was really a powerful way to work with people.
Okay.
And something about myth and fairy tale that's very archetypal.
Okay.
And it really allows people to have a sense that they're not alone, that some character has gone through something before, faced obstacles, sometimes a lot of obstacles,
Okay.
was on a journey and had to discover something on their journey. And so it can be really helpful when people are suffering to know, right, that these obstacles are part of a journey. They're not something that is going to overwhelm you and stop you from moving forward. But when you identify with a character from a myth or a fairy tale or a story, you have a safe way of really understanding your own journey because that's what happens in the process
I
is you're,
see.
let's say for example, I mentioned that I worked with people with eating disorders, severe anorexia, and I had a woman who was really on the brink of dying because she was 65 pounds and would not eat. She would hide her food. I would sit on, as I mentioned, she was hooked up to a heart monitor. So I would sit on her bed and sometimes sit on food that she had hidden there. So she wasn't eating, she wasn't responding. So I started working with her. I didn't talk about weight. I didn't talk about food. First question I asked her, what fairy tales or myths do you like? Immediately she lit up and she said, The Wizard of Oz.
Ah.
Okay, we're going to work with that. She was totally surprised, totally engaged. She chose the character of Dorothy. And as we worked, the tornado was her eating disorder.
I see.
And took her to this land of Oz, which she loved because it was magical, it was starvation, it felt holy to her. And Good Witch Glenda, if you know the Wizard of Oz, I'm assuming everybody knows the Wizard of Oz because Good Witch Glenda was the hospital doctors. I'm sorry, I'm sorry. The Bad Witch was the hospital doctors.
Okay.
They were trying to take her away, right? They were trying to get her to eat. And and so we worked this way, and I didn't say anything about the tornado's dangerous, you're going to die, nothing. We worked creatively. And then one day, as she was embodying this tornado, she was spinning around in her bed, and she started shaking, and she had tears coming down, and she said, "This is really dangerous." And I said, "Yes." And I knew at that moment she had accessed something, because when people are starving themselves, they're pretty removed from their feelings, right? Part of that is to not feel. So she started to feel. And then we were able to work through her healing, because she realized that Oz really was not a safe place to be. And she needed to come back into her body. So that's kind of an example of how I've worked with it. And you asked me why I wrote the book. I think because I saw that it could really make a difference for people. And I also taught a class in this approach at Concordia for 20 years to graduate students. And I watched them go through the process. And so I feel like it's really a powerful process. And the book outlines each step of it so that people can actually go through it as they're reading the book. I recommend that people go through it within the context of a group for themselves, so that they have witnesses, so that they're not alone in it. Um, but really, I wrote the book to be of service. I wrote the book because I feel like it can be helpful for the world right now, and that it's a powerful and safe way of working.
For me, when I'm listening to you talk, I've never thought of using fairy tales or fantasies in that format. Never even thought it was a concept, right? So, a lot of people are used to a specific idea of how to heal, right? Like we've been taught, like this is so the fact that there's other options or there's other ways of doing things, because the specific norm of how to heal is not working for everybody. Because if it did, a lot of people. So I appreciate you mentioning that, and allows me to realize that what you need to open up your mind on different prospects of how to heal and what can work for other people. And I appreciate this conversation because telling you, I never like it wasn't a concept. Because it's not like nobody really talks about stuff like that because it's not considered norm. So it's nice to know that there's different ways to heal, and it's nice to people know that if this is not working, maybe I should try that. Maybe I should get the book and see if this is going to help me heal. With that
Yes.
said, I think if anybody's interested in, reaching out to you or understanding more of your platform or even where to get the book, what is the best platform that they can reach you out or even buy the book itself?
Well, the book's available on Amazon and lots of different avenues. I think it's in Chapters and Indigo and Barnes and Nobles, and it's Amazon, I believe, pretty much all over the world. But probably the best way is to go to my website, which
Okay.
is www.yehuditsilverman.com. And they can also email me at contact@yehuditsilverman.com. I
I
love
like
hearing
that.
from people. I have a newsletter where I send out different information about what's happening in terms of the story within. And I also have a closed Facebook group that people can join. So people get to share what they're doing and if they're working with groups. And I give different lectures and presentations. So yeah,
I
so great
appreciate
to
that. I like that. And then before I let you go, is there anything you want to add or say about art therapy that you think people should know, or how would you like anything you want to say in respects to what we discussed today?
yeah. Well, I really appreciate what you said about being open to different ways of healing, because I really think there's a spectrum, and it's not that one way is better than another way. We need all of them right now in the world. But I think that using the arts is really a life-giving way of of healing, and it really brings up our sense of resilience and strength. And I feel like that's so important because often when we think about therapy, we think about working with problems and that we have to solve the problem. And I think there's another way of looking at it, which is really that we are uncovering our own healing, our own sense of resilience and strength. And I think that creativity can do that.
Appreciate that. I want to say thank you for having this conversation with me. I've learned a lot. I think it's nice to know there are different ways and art can be used, different type of art can be used to help somebody heal. So even if I'm talking to somebody and I can tell they're not verbally able to converse, it'd be more like, okay, maybe you want to go draw it or maybe you want to dance or whatever you feel comfortable with, that's an option for you and that's something out there that somebody wants to seek, that can be something that can benefit you instead of actually verbally talking about it.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I've enjoyed this too. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today on our weekly episode of Health Your Way podcast. Don't forget to subscribe, share with others, and please feel free to comment below and ask any questions on topics we discussed, as well as future topics you'd like to hear about. Have a happy and healthy week, and be sure to tune in next week for the next episode on a Health Your Way podcast.